The snow came down hard enough to erase the road behind him, a forgotten cabin, a lonely war veteran who came north to disappear, and a German shepherd who would not stop staring at the fireplace, growling, warning, knowing. Rowan Hale thought he had bought silence. Instead, he uncovered a truth buried for 14 years. One powerful people were willing to burn everything to erase. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Marquette. Michigan existed in winter as if winter were its natural state. Snow had settled into every crack and corner of the town, packed hard by weeks of wind off Lake Superior. The lake itself lay unseen beyond the low hills, but its presence was unmistakable. The cold carried a damp weight that sank through coats and into bone. The sky hung low and gray, neither storming nor clearing, as if undecided whether the day was worth the effort. Rowan Hale moved through the streets with the quiet certainty of a man accustomed to harsh places. He was 46 years old, tall and lean, built for endurance rather than strength. His dark hair was cut short and streaked with gray at the temples. A narrow scar ran from the corner of his mouth toward his cheek, faint but noticeable, the kind earned young and carried for life. His eyes were pale blue, watchful without appearing suspicious, and his expression rarely changed unless he chose it to. He wore a heavy canvas jacket over a plain hoodie, jeans faded from years of use, and work boots that had long ago lost their shine. Nothing about him drew attention, and that was intentional. At his side walked Kestrel, a German shepherd with an unusual silver-gray coat that blended seamlessly with the winter landscape. The dog was large but lean, his movements controlled and deliberate. His muzzle had begun to whiten with age, yet his amber eyes remained sharp and steady. At 9 years old, Kestrel no longer carried the restless energy of youth, but there was nothing fragile about him. He stayed close to Rowan, not out of need but out of habit, forged through years of shared vigilance. He observed everything without reacting, as if measuring the world rather than fearing it. The county courthouse annex sat back from the street, its concrete exterior dulled by salt and time. Inside, the air was warm to the point of discomfort, thick with the smell of damp coats, old paper, and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Overhead, a small crowd had gathered for the tax foreclosure auction, most of them locals who knew one another well enough to speak in glances instead of words. Rowan signed his name at the entry table and took a seat on a wooden bench near the back of the room. Kestrel lay down at his feet, alert but calm, facing the crowd. Rowan rested a gloved hand briefly on the dog's shoulder, a familiar grounding gesture, then folded his hands and waited. At the front stood the auctioneer, Harold Sutter, a heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning blonde hair and a tired face. His suit was inexpensive and slightly too tight, his tie crooked from repeated adjustments. He spoke with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this job too long to pretend it mattered. One by one, he moved through the list, seized equipment, foreclosed vehicles, a small house near the edge of town. Each item drew brief interest, a few raised hands, muted competition. Rowan did not react. He was waiting for yet one specific line. At a folding table near the aisle sat a clerk named Sarah Langley. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with pale skin and freckles scattered across her nose. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and faint shadows beneath her eyes suggested long hours and little rest. She worked quickly, efficiently, but her posture was slightly tense, as if she expected trouble even where none existed. When bidders approached her table, she was polite, careful, and distant in a way that suggested experience had taught her caution. Harold cleared his throat and glanced down at the final page of his list. "Next item," he said. "Parcel 12. Known locally as the Hollow Brick Place." The room shifted. Conversation stopped. A man in the front row leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Someone near the door exhaled slowly, as if bracing. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Rowan noticed it immediately. Harold continued reading. 110 acres, 1 cabin, condition listed as uninhabitable, 1 outbuilding, well status unknown, property acquired by county through tax delinquency, 14 years unpaid. 14 years. No one spoke, no one raised a hand. Kestrel lifted his head slightly, ears angling forward, sensing the tension without understanding its cause. Rowan kept his gaze steady, his posture unchanged. "Opening bid is $500, Harold said, his voice flatter now, as though he expected the silence to continue. It did. Rowan raised his hand. "500, he said. Harold blinked, surprised but relieved. "I have 500 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 6? No response. The auctioneer waited a moment longer than necessary, scanning the room out of habit rather than hope. A man seated near the front, late 60s, broad-shouldered, beard gray and untrimmed, finally looked up and met Rowan's eyes. His face was weathered, his expression neither hostile nor friendly. He shook his head once, slow and deliberate. It was not a challenge, it was a warning. "Going once?" Harold said quickly. "Going twice." He brought the gavel down. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet room. "Sold. Parcel 12 to the gentleman in the back." A low murmur rippled through the crowd, restrained but uneasy. Rowan stood and walked toward the clerk's table. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. Kestrel rose and followed, staying close. Sarah did not look up at first. She aligned the paperwork carefully before speaking. "Name?" "Rowan Hale." She wrote it down. "Mailing address?" He gave her a post office box. She nodded, slid the documents toward him, and lowered her voice slightly. "This property is sold as is," she said. "And access isn't guaranteed. Roads aren't always maintained." Rowan met her eyes. "I understand." She hesitated, then added quietly, "People don't bid on that place." "Why?" Rowan asked, not pressing, merely inviting. Sarah's mouth tightened. She glanced around the room, then back at the papers. "Because it's complicated," she said. "That's all I can say." Rowan signed the forms. "Complicated doesn't scare me." She stamped the documents with a sharp final sound and slid the deed toward him, as if relieved to be finished with it. "Good luck," she said, though it sounded less like a wish and more like a habit. As Rowan turned to leave, the bearded man from the front row spoke without looking directly at him. "That dog of yours," he said. "He listen well?" Rowan paused. "Better than most people." The man nodded once. "Then pay attention." Outside, the cold struck immediately. Wind pushed snow across the parking lot in thin sheets, stinging exposed skin. Rowan walked to his truck, the sound of boots crunching on ice loud in the quiet afternoon. Kestrel moved beside him, alert but composed. Before opening the door, Rowan paused. The town behind him felt small, contained, as if holding its breath. He had come here looking for isolation, for a place where the noise of the world could not reach him easily. Instead, he had bought something everyone else had gone out of their way to avoid. Kestrel stopped suddenly and lifted his head, nostrils flaring. His posture tightened, subtle but unmistakable. He was not frightened. He was alert. Rowan followed the dog's gaze toward the north, where the sky darkened slightly, heavy with unshed snow. After a moment, Kestrel relaxed and looked back at him, calm, restored. Rowan opened the truck door and climbed inside. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble. As he pulled out of the lot and headed toward the edge of town, where pavement gave way to rougher roads, one thought settled firmly in his mind. 14 years was a long time for a place to be left alone, and places were rarely abandoned without reason. The road out of Marquette thinned quickly, as if the town itself had decided where it would stop taking responsibility. Pavement gave way to patched asphalt, then to gravel, and finally to a narrow dirt track cut into the land with no clear intention of being permanent. Snow lay thick along the shoulders, pressed into ridges by plows that had stopped coming years ago. The forest closed in on both sides, tall pines and bare birches standing shoulder to shoulder like silent witnesses who had learned not to speak. Rowan Hale drove steadily, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. His old pickup moved with the patient growl of an engine that had been repaired more times than replaced. The heater pushed out lukewarm air, barely enough to keep the windshield clear. He didn't rush. Roads like this punished haste. They rewarded attention. Kestrel sat upright in the passenger seat, his body angled slightly toward the window, nose working slowly. Snow blurred the lower trunks of the trees, but the dog's gaze moved beyond what the eye could easily see. His ears rotated independently, tracking distant sounds, wind threading through branches, the faint crack of ice settling, the far-off groan of a tree bending under weight. He didn't whine or fidget, he simply observed. After several miles, Rowan noticed the first irregularity. A fallen spruce lay across the road, its trunk thick and stripped of smaller branches, positioned at a point where the track narrowed and curved sharply toward a shallow ravine. It had been there long enough for snow to gather evenly along its length, but not long enough for the bark to darken with rot. Rowan slowed, eased the truck into a tight turn around the obstruction, and continued on. Fallen trees happened, but the placement felt deliberate, too neatly inconvenient. A mile later, the road dipped sharply, forcing the truck close to a ditch choked with ice. Thorny brush crowded one side, bent inward as if trained to reclaim the path. Rowan steered carefully, tires crunching over frozen ground. Again, it could have been neglect, but neglect, he knew, was usually lazy. This felt curated. He didn't comment. He logged it away. The final stretch opened into a small clearing ringed by dense woods. At its center stood the cabin. It was smaller than Rowan had expected, built low and solid from timber darkened by decades of weather. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of old snow, and the porch leaned just enough to suggest fatigue without collapse. The windows were opaque with grime, reflecting the gray sky in dull patches. What stood out was the chimney, a tall stack of red-brown brick rising from the side of the structure, cleaner than the rest, its lines straight and deliberate. It looked less like an afterthought and more like a statement. Rowan cut the engine. The sudden quiet was heavy, broken only by the wind whispering through the trees. Cold seeped in immediately as he opened the door. Kestrel jumped down, paws landing softly in the snow. He paused, head low, scanning the clearing with measured intent. "Easy," Rowan murmured, not as a command, but as acknowledgement. The porch groaned under Rowan's weight as he stepped up. The boards held. He tested the door. It opened with a long, complaining creak that echoed into the trees. No lock resisted him. No alarm announced his arrival. Inside, the air was stale but not rotten. It smelled of cold ash, old wood, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. The cabin consisted of one main room, compact but efficiently laid out. A rough wooden table stood near the center, flanked by two chairs. Against one wall sat a narrow bed frame stripped to its springs, a folded blanket laid neatly at its foot as if someone had intended to return. A coat hung on a peg near the door, heavy wool, dark green, its pockets weighted with something that pulled the fabric out of shape. Rowan didn't touch it yet. His eyes moved, cataloging. The floorboards bore scuffs that didn't match the pattern of abandonment. Near the window, a ceramic mug rested on the table, a faint ring of dried residue at its bottom. Beside it lay a notebook, closed but not stored, its cover bent slightly from use. Dust had settled unevenly, suggesting that the stillness here had been interrupted more recently than the county records implied. Kestrel moved slowly, nose close to the ground, tracing the perimeter of the room. He paused at the bed, sniffed once, then continued. His behavior was calm but purposeful. This was not curiosity. It was assessment. Rowan set his pack down near the door and walked to the window, wiping a clear patch in the grime with his sleeve. The woods pressed close, thick enough to hide movement. Nothing stirred. Still, he felt the sensation of being observed, not sharply, not urgently, but enough to register. He had felt it before, in places where men learned to watch without being seen. He turned back to the room and began unpacking essentials: water, canned food, a lantern. He worked with the quiet efficiency of routine, letting familiarity steady him. Outside, the light had already begun to thin, the gray deepening toward blue. Winter afternoons did not linger here. As Rowan set the lantern on the table, a sound reached him from beyond the clearing. An engine, faint, distant, struggling against terrain rather than speed. Kestrel froze. His body stiffened, ears locked forward, tail still. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, not a bark, but a warning meant for someone who understood him. Rowan stilled immediately, listening. The sound faded after several seconds, swallowed by the forest and the wind. Rowan waited longer, counting breaths. When nothing else followed, he moved to the door and stepped back onto the porch. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by trees. his figure dark against the snow. He was tall and broad, wearing a heavy parka and a knit cap pulled low. His beard was thick and untrimmed, shot through with gray, and his posture suggested a lifetime of physical work. He did not advance. He did not retreat. He simply stood, hands visible at his sides. Rowan kept his voice even. "Afternoon." The man hesitated, then stepped forward enough to be clearly seen. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. His voice was rough, not unfriendly, but cautious. "Name's Eli Mercer. I live about 3 miles east. Saw the truck tracks. Figured someone finally bought the place." Rowan studied him. Eli appeared to be in his early 60s, his face weathered deeply around the eyes and mouth. His gaze was direct but not intrusive. There was a stiffness in his shoulders that suggested old injuries, and the way he stood angled slightly away spoke of a man accustomed to keeping exits in mind. "I did," Rowan said. "Rowan Hale." Eli nodded, eyes flicking briefly to Kestrel, who had taken position beside. Rowan, alert but silent. "Good dog," Eli said. "Looks like he's seen things." "So have I," Rowan replied. Eli exhaled slowly, fogging the air. "That cabin's been empty a long time, longer than people like to admit. Folks don't come out this way unless they have to." "I noticed the road," Rowan said. Eli's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "County says it's maintained. County says a lot of things." He hesitated, then added, "If you need supplies, you won't find them out here. Last place worth stopping is Calder's shop, back near town. After that, you're on your own." "That suits me," Rowan said. Eli studied him a moment longer. "Maybe, just keep your eyes open." He nodded once, then turned and walked back into the trees, his steps steady and unhurried. Within seconds, the forest swallowed him. Rowan remained on the porch until the woods were still again. He felt no immediate threat, but Eli's visit confirmed what the road had already suggested. This place was not simply forgotten. It was avoided. Inside, the temperature dropped quickly as daylight faded. Rowan decided to stay the night rather than risk the road in failing light. He set about preparing the space, moving with care. He examined the coat on the peg. Inside one pocket he found a set of keys. In the other, a folded piece of paper bearing only a hand-drawn symbol, a simple triangle intersected by a line. No explanation. No date. Kestrel circled once near the fireplace, then moved on, showing no particular interest. Rowan noted the brickwork again, its clean lines at odds with the rest of the cabin's wear, but filed the thought away. There would be time to look closer. He ate a simple meal as night settled fully, the wind rising slightly outside. The cabin creaked as wood adjusted to cold. Rowan lay back on his sleeping pad, boots within reach, jacket folded beside him. Kestrel settled near the door, facing outward. As Rowan closed his eyes, one thought surfaced clearly and without drama. Whatever had kept this place empty for 14 years was still close enough to notice when someone returned. And tonight, it knew he was here. Night settled over the cabin without ceremony. There was no sudden drop, no dramatic shift, just the gradual closing in of darkness as the last diluted light bled from the snow. The forest pressed closer, its outlines blurring until trees became a single, breathing mass. The wind moved through the branches in low, uneven waves, not yet violent, but restless, like something turning over in its sleep. Rowan Hale lay on his sleeping pad near the far wall, boots still on, jacket folded within arm's reach. He didn't sleep immediately. He rarely did in new places. His breathing slowed, but his awareness remained just beneath the surface, tuned to the cabin's sounds, the soft tick of cooling wood, the faint rattle of a loose window pane, the steady rhythm of Kestrel's breath near the door. Kestrel lay sphinx-like, head up, eyes open. His ears shifted subtly, catching variations in the wind that Rowan could not yet hear. At 9 years old, the dog had learned the difference between ordinary noise and information. Tonight, the wind carried information. Sometime after midnight, snow began to fall. It started lightly, flakes drifting sideways through gaps in the trees, whispering as they touched the roof. Within an hour, the whisper became a steady hush, the kind that muted distance and erased depth. The temperature dropped, sharp enough that Rowan could feel it through the floorboards. He rose quietly, moving stiffly at first, and fed a small fire in the stove. The flames caught quickly, their light throwing long, distorted shadows across the walls. That was when Kestrel changed. It was not sudden, not dramatic. The dog stood, stretched once, then froze halfway through the motion. His head angled toward the fireplace, not the fire itself, but the brickwork beneath it, his tail lowered. Stiff, a low sound vibrated in his chest, barely audible, more felt than heard. Rowan straightened. He had seen this posture before, years ago, in places where hidden things waited patiently to be discovered. "What is it?" he murmured, not expecting an answer. Kestrel took a slow step forward, nose low, sniffing along the base of the fireplace. His movements were controlled but intent, as if drawn by something he did not fully understand but could not ignore. He pressed his nose into the narrow seams between bricks, inhaling deeply, then withdrew, ears flattening briefly against his skull. Rowan approached, crouching beside him. The bricks looked ordinary at first glance, aged, darkened by soot, uneven as old masonry tended to be. But when Rowan ran his gloved fingers along the mortar line near the floor, he felt the difference immediately. The texture was smoother, less brittle than the surrounding material. It gave slightly under pressure. His pulse quickened, but he did not rush. Rushing led to mistakes. He retrieved a utility knife from his pack and carefully scraped at the seam. The blade sank in a fraction of an inch. This was not old mortar. This was sealant, aged, darkened, deliberately disguised. Kestrel stepped back, watching intently, his earlier unease sharpening into focused attention. The fire crackled behind them, unaware of the significance unfolding at its base. Rowan fetched his crowbar from the truck, working quickly but quietly. He wedged the flat end into the softened seam and applied steady pressure. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a dull groan, the brick shifted. He worked the edge, levering carefully until the section gave way and slid outward with a heavy scrape. A rectangular cavity opened beneath the hearth, lined with stone, no more than 4 feet deep. Cold air breathed up from it, carrying a scent that was not earth but metal and old paper. Inside lay a weather-sealed steel case and a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Kestrel's tension drained instantly, his posture relaxed, tail giving a single slow sweep. Whatever had troubled him had been named. Rowan exhaled slowly. He did not touch the contents yet. Instead, he replaced the brick loosely and stepped back, taking a moment to think. Discoveries like this demanded patience. He covered the seam with ash and stepped away as if nothing had changed. The storm intensified through the early morning hours. Snow piled against the cabin walls, wind driving it into every crack. By dawn, visibility was reduced to a shifting wall of white. Rowan brewed coffee on the stove, the bitter scent cutting through the cold air. Kestrel ate quietly, then resumed his watch near the fireplace, no longer distressed but attentive. By mid-morning, a new sound fought its way through the storm. An engine, closer this time, heavier. Rowan moved to the window, clearing a small circle in the grime. A county-issued SUV struggled into the clearing, tires grinding against packed snow. It stopped near the porch, engine idling. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, wearing a sheriff's winter coat. He was in his mid-50s, with a square jaw and a heavy mustache dusted with gray. His face was weathered but carefully composed, the expression of someone used to being listened to. His eyes, dark and narrow, scanned the cabin before settling on Rowan. Kestrel rose, hackles lifting slightly. Rowan opened the door a few inches. Cold air rushed in. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff Tom Bell," he said, flashing a badge. "Just making sure you're all right. Storm's turning ugly." Rowan nodded. "I'm fine." Bell glanced past him into the cabin. His gaze lingered on the fireplace, just a fraction too long. "Road's not safe in weather like this," he said. "Not many folks come out here. Thought I'd check in." "I appreciate it," Rowan replied evenly. Bell's eyes flicked to Kestrel. "That's a serious dog." "He does his job," Rowan said. The sheriff chuckled softly. "So do I." He paused, lowering his voice. "This land's had issues. Folks get curious. Sometimes curiosity brings trouble. Best thing is to keep your head down." Rowan met his gaze. "I tend to." Bell nodded, satisfied, and stepped back. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find us." He returned to his vehicle and drove away, leaving deep tracks that the snow quickly began to erase. Rowan closed the door and bolted it. He waited until the sound of the engine was gone before moving. Kestrel returned to the fireplace, sniffed once, then looked up at Rowan, amber eyes steady. "They know," Rowan said quietly. The storm trapped them for another full day. Rowan used the time to dig out the cavity beneath the hearth properly, working carefully. Inside the steel case he found documents sealed in plastic, lab reports, water samples, handwritten notes. The oilcloth bundle contained a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with precise, controlled handwriting. The name on the inside cover stopped him, cold. Lena Vargo. Rowan sat at the table, reading by lantern light as the wind howled outside. Lena's entries were methodical, unemotional, documenting test results, altered reports, pressure from unnamed superiors. She wrote of threats disguised as warnings, of inspections that came without cause, of a final decision to hide her work where it would not be destroyed. She did not write about fear, she wrote about responsibility. By the time Rowan closed the journal, night had returned. He replaced everything carefully, sealing the cavity once more. The brick slid back into place with deceptive normalcy. Kestrel lay near the hearth, calm again, his duty fulfilled for now. Rowan understood then what he had bought at the auction, not land, not a cabin. He had bought a truth that others had tried very hard to bury, and now that truth knew his name. The storm broke the following morning without apology. Snow still clung to the trees, but the wind had shifted, pushing clouds east and leaving the clearing exposed to a pale, brittle light. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It carried weight, the kind that settled after something had passed through and left its mark. Rowan Hale stepped outside with a shovel and began clearing the porch and the narrow path to his truck. His movements were steady, economical. The work warmed him, but it did nothing to ease the awareness that had taken root since the sheriff's visit. Pressure had a shape, even when it left no footprints. You could feel it in the way quiet changed. Kestrel ranged the edge of the clearing while Rowan worked, moving in wide, deliberate arcs. His silver-gray coat blended into the snow-shadowed brush, making him nearly invisible when he stood still. He was calm, but not relaxed. His ears tracked sounds beyond the clearing, head lifting whenever the wind shifted. Twice he paused and stared toward the road, tail held level, then moved on without comment. Rowan took note. When the path was clear enough to walk safely, Rowan circled the truck. The front tires were fine. The rear passenger tire looked intact. He crouched at the driver's side rear wheel and saw it immediately. A thin, precise cut in the sidewall, angled just enough to ensure the tire would fail slowly rather than explode outright. Not damage from a rock, not wear. A blade had been used, clean and deliberate. Rowan straightened slowly. He did not swear. He did not rush. He stood there for a long moment, breath visible in the cold air, letting the message settle. Someone had come back after the storm, or had never left. He patched the tire as best he could, knowing it would hold long enough to move the truck if necessary, but not for extended travel. The isolation was no longer theoretical. It was enforced. By midday, the road showed fresh signs of disturbance. The fallen. Spruce that had blocked the narrow curve was gone, dragged aside with effort. Tire tracks, newer, heavier than his own, cut through the snow and vanished back toward town. Rowan followed them on foot for a short distance, careful not to leave a clear trail of his own, then turned back. Whoever had come through wanted the road passable. That was new. Inside the cabin, Rowan set the steel case and Lena Vargo's journal on the table. He read more closely now, not just absorbing the facts, but mapping the pattern. Dates, locations, repeated references to adjusted thresholds, and external review. Names were absent, but initials appeared often enough to suggest consistency. Lena had been careful. She had expected this to be found by someone who knew how to read between lines. Kestrel lay near the hearth, eyes open, watching Rowan rather than the door. The dog's earlier distress had settled into a watchful patience, as if his role now was simply to remind Rowan that the étiquette, truth beneath the floor, had weight. In the early afternoon, a new sound approached, this one confident, unhurried, a different engine, more powerful. Rowan looked through the window and saw a black pickup ease into the clearing, its paint clean enough to reflect the snow. The truck stopped well short of the porch, positioned deliberately in open view. A man stepped out. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, dressed in a tailored winter coat that looked more at home in a city than in the woods. His beard was neatly trimmed, salt and pepper gray, his hair thick and combed back despite the wind. He moved with practiced ease, as if accustomed to being watched. He appeared to be in his late 50s, his posture straight, his expression open in a way that suggested confidence rather than friendliness. Kestrel stood and moved forward, placing himself between Rowan and the door. His stance was firm, silent, unmistakable. Rowan opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him. "You're a long way off the main road," he said. The man smiled faintly. "That's the point, isn't it?" He extended a gloved hand. "Graham North, Northwind Materials." Rowan did not shake his hand. "What do you want?" Graham withdrew his hand without offense. Up close, his eyes were a pale steel blue, sharp and calculating. "Straight to business. I appreciate that." He glanced at the cabin, the chimney, the surrounding trees. "This property sits on land my company has been evaluating for some time. The previous owner made that difficult." "She disappeared," Rowan said. Graham's smile thinned. "People leave all the time. Some handle it better than others." He shifted his weight, boots crunching softly in the snow. "I'm here to make you an offer." Rowan folded his arms. "I just bought it." "Exactly," Graham replied smoothly. "You paid $500. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000, cash, today." He paused, letting the number hang. "No complications, no paperwork headaches. You walk away with a profit most people don't see in a lifetime." Kestrel let out a low, restrained growl. Graham glanced at him, assessing. "Impressive animal," he said. "You train him yourself?" "He trained me," Rowan replied. Graham laughed lightly, as if indulging a joke. "You strike me as a practical man, Mr. Hale. This place is isolated. Access is unreliable. Weather alone makes it a liability. And there's history here, history that attracts the wrong kind of attention." His gaze hardened slightly. "I'd hate for you to inherit problems that aren't yours." Rowan met his eyes. "You already cut my tire." The smile vanished. Graham's expression cooled, though his voice remained calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." Rowan shrugged. "Then we're done." Graham studied him for a long moment, recalibrating. When he spoke again, the friendliness was gone. "This land will be developed," he said, "with or without your cooperation. The question is whether you benefit from that process or get caught under it." "I'm not selling," Rowan said. Graham nodded slowly, as if confirming something for himself. "Think it over," he said. "Storms have a way of changing perspectives." He turned and walked back to his truck without another word, driving away with deliberate calm. Rowan watched until the vehicle disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did he turn back inside. That evening, the pressure intensified without showing its face. The cabin's power, already non-existent, wasn't missed until Rowan discovered his radio antenna had been snapped clean off. A drone passed overhead just once, high and fast, gone before he could track it. Kestrel reacted immediately, ears flat, body tense, eyes following its path until it vanished. Rowan packed a small bag with copies of Lena's documents, sealing them in waterproof sleeves. He hid the originals beneath the hearth once more, resealing the brick and masking the seam. He worked by lantern light, methodical, unhurried. Panic wasted time. Time was the one resource he still controlled. Near midnight, Kestrel alerted again, not sharply, but insistently. Rowan moved to the window and saw headlights far down the road, stationary, their beams angled into the trees rather than toward the cabin. Watching, waiting. Rowan did not respond. He doused the lantern, letting the cabin fall into darkness, and sat quietly with Kestrel at his side. They waited together, two shapes in the cold, while the lights eventually clicked off and the forest reclaimed the night. By morning, the message was clear. This was no longer about land value, it was about containment. Rowan stood on the porch as the sky lightened, breath steady, mind clear. He had choices to make, and little time to make them. He went back inside and began preparing. The night did not fall so much as it crept in, inch by inch, until the clearing was swallowed and the cabin stood alone against a field of black. The sky held no stars. Clouds moved low and fast, smearing moonlight into nothing. Rowan Hale finished his preparations before the last of the gray faded, working by habit rather than urgency. Urgency made noise. Habit made fewer mistakes. He shut down every source of light inside the cabin, leaving only the dull ember of the stove. The lantern was capped and placed under the table. The windows were covered from the inside with heavy canvas, not to keep the cold out, nothing would do that, but to prevent silhouettes. He tested the door again, tightening the temporary brace he had wedged beneath the handle. It would not stop a determined force, but it would slow one. Slowing mattered. Kestrel moved with him, quiet as breath. The dog's silver-gray coat caught the faintest glow from the embers, his outline barely distinguishable against the walls. At 9 years old, he no longer wasted energy pacing. He chose a position near the door where scent pooled and sound carried, and he stayed there, head lifted, eyes open. His ears flicked once, then stilled. The night was listening back. Rowan sat on the floor with his back to the wall, rifle across his knees. He had cleaned it earlier, oiled it lightly, checked the action. He had no intention of using it unless forced. Violence solved some problems, but it created others that lasted longer. Still, he knew better than to pretend it wasn't an option. Sometime after midnight, Kestrel's posture changed. It was subtle enough that Rowan might have missed it if he hadn't been watching. The dog's head angled toward the far side of the cabin, away from the road. His ears pressed forward, then flattened slightly. His breathing slowed, almost stopped. A low vibration began in his chest, not a growl, but a warning tuned for someone who understood him. Rowan did not move. He listened. At first there was nothing beyond the wind, threading through the trees with uneven force. Then, beneath it, something else. A soft crunch, irregular and cautious. Not an animal. Animals moved differently, lighter, without hesitation. This sound paused, adjusted, resumed. Footsteps. Rowan shifted his grip on the rifle and angled his body to face the door without rising. He counted steps in his head, gauging distance by sound alone. Whoever was outside knew the road was watched. They had chosen the woods. The footsteps stopped near the side of the cabin. Silence stretched, tight as wire. A faint metallic scrape followed, brief and controlled, as if someone had tested the window latch and decided against it. Rowan felt his pulse pick up, not from fear, but from recognition. This was a probe. They were measuring him. Kestrel's growl deepened, barely audible, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Rowan laid a hand on the dog's shoulder, not to restrain him, but to ground both of them. Then came the knock. It was not loud. It was not aggressive. 3 measured taps, evenly spaced. Rowan exhaled through his nose. He did not answer. The knock came again, closer to the doorframe this time, followed by a voice pitched low and careful. "Mr. Hale," the voice said. Male, mid-30s, maybe older, calm. "County Utilities. We've had reports of a line issue out here." Rowan almost smiled. He stood slowly, keeping his weight centered, and approached the door without making a sound. He didn't open it. "You're out late," he said through the wood. A pause. The voice adjusted. "Storm damage doesn't keep hours." Rowan leaned close enough to catch scent through the gap beneath the door. Cold air carried traces of oil, rubber, and something sharper, metal, recently handled, not a utility worker. "There's no line," Rowan said evenly. "And I didn't call anyone." Another pause, longer this time. The voice dropped the isitosia. "Pretense. We just want to talk." Kestrel's growl rolled deeper, filling the small space like distant thunder. Rowan felt it vibrate through his boots. "No," Rowan replied. The sound of retreating steps followed, quick and controlled. Not panicked, not careless. Rowan waited, listening as the footsteps split, one set circling wide, the other fading back toward the road. He moved to the window on the far wall and lifted the canvas just enough to peer through a narrow gap. Headlights flared briefly through the trees, then cut. The woods swallowed them whole. The test was over. Rowan did not sleep after that. He brewed coffee and drank it black, letting the bitterness sharpen him. Kestrel remained near the door, posture easing only slightly once the night quieted again. By morning, fresh tracks scarred the snow around the cabin. 2 sets of boots, heavy tread, careful spacing. Rowan photographed them with his phone, along with the cut tire and the snapped antenna. He did not upload anything, not yet. Information moved best when you chose the moment. Late that morning, the sound of a smaller engine approached, lighter than the truck from the night before, uneven in pitch. Rowan stepped outside as a snowmobile eased into the clearing. The rider cut the engine and removed his helmet. The man was lean and wiry, perhaps early 40s, with a narrow face and a day's growth of dark stubble. His hair was black and cut short, but his eyebrows were thick and expressive, giving his otherwise guarded face an alert, almost restless look. He wore a battered parka patched at the elbows and gloves that had been repaired more than replaced. His eyes moved constantly, not nervously, but attentively, cataloging space. "Eli said you might need supplies," the man said. His voice was quick, clipped. "Name's Jonah Pike." Rowan recognized the surname immediately. "Related to Dorian Pike?" he asked. Jonah nodded once. "Brother?" His mouth tightened briefly. "He's the one who writes. I'm the one who fixes things." Kestrel approached Jonah, sniffed once, then sat back, neutral. That was enough for Rowan. Jonah dismounted and set a small crate on the snow. "Food, radio batteries, fuel can." He hesitated, then added, "And a message." Rowan waited. "Northwind's been asking questions," Jonah said quietly. "Not officially, cash questions, about you, about whether you plan to stay." Rowan met his eyes. "And you?" Jonah shrugged. "I don't like men who ask the wrong questions with the right money." He glanced at the cabin. "This place has been a problem for them longer than most folks know. Lena Vargo didn't vanish. She went underground." Rowan's grip tightened slightly on the crate. "You know that for certain?" Jonah nodded. "Dorian tracked it halfway before it got too hot. We lost contact after that." He straightened, decision made. "If you're holding something of hers, you should move copies. Not into town, out of reach." Rowan considered him for a long moment. "Why help me?" Jonah's expression hardened. "Because people downstream deserve clean water, and because my brother doesn't quit once he smells a story." He replaced his helmet. "You've got maybe a day before they stop pretending." With that, he remounted and disappeared into the trees, leaving a thin line in the snow that the wind would soon erase. Rowan carried the crate inside and unpacked it. He tested the radio, static, then a distant weather band. Another storm was forming, heavier than the last. Cover, Jonah had implied, or deadline. Rowan pulled out his phone and began selecting files, copies of lab reports, photos of tracks, notes from Lena's journal. He encrypted them and prepared to send, then stopped. Timing mattered. Sending too early invited interception. Too late invited silence. Kestrel rose and moved to the fireplace, not distressed this time, but attentive. Rowan glanced at the hearth and understood. The truth beneath it had reached outward now. Others were listening. As evening fell again, Rowan finished packing a small go bag. He placed it near the door, within reach. He checked the rifle once more, then set it aside. Tonight was not about fighting. It was about deciding where the fight would happen. Outside, clouds thickened, swallowing what little light remained. The wind began to rise, testing the trees, testing the cabin, testing him. Rowan sat down beside Kestrel and rested his hand on the dog's neck. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we move the story." Kestrel did not look at him. His eyes stayed on the door, steady and unafraid. The test was over. The next move would not be subtle. The storm arrived before dawn, not as a sudden strike, but as a steady closing of distance. Wind came first, pressing against the cabin in deliberate pulses, testing joints and seams. Snow followed soon after, thick and wet, clinging to branches until they bowed and cracked under the weight. By the time Rowan Hale finished packing, the clearing had narrowed to a white corridor, visibility reduced to a few dozen yards at best. He moved without haste, guided by decisions already made the night before. The go bag sat open on the table, spare clothes, food bars, first aid kit, and a hard drive sealed in plastic. The copies of Lena Vargo's files were there too, organized, labeled, ready to move. The originals remained hidden beneath the hearth, sealed back into their stone cradle. Some truths were safer when divided. Kestrel followed Rowan from room to room, close but unobtrusive. His silver-gray coat stood slightly on end, not from fear but from focus. He sensed motion in the storm that Rowan could not yet hear. When Rowan knelt to lace his boots tighter, Kestrel pressed his muzzle briefly against Rowan's shoulder, a grounding touch neither of them acknowledged out loud. "We're taking the long way," Rowan said quietly. Kestrel's ears flicked once. He understood tone if not language. The truck would not make it through the storm, patch tire or not. Rowan had decided that hours earlier. Instead, he pulled the old snowshoes from the outbuilding Eli had mentioned, their straps cracked but serviceable. He checked the radio one last time. Static. Weather band warned of worsening conditions, high winds, whiteout risk. The storm was doing exactly what Jonah Pike had predicted, cover or deadline. Rowan stepped outside and locked the cabin behind him, not because it would stop anyone, but because habits mattered. He took one last look at the chimney, its brickwork standing firm against the snow, and turned north into the trees. The forest swallowed, sound almost immediately. Snow dampened everything, softening footfalls and swallowing echoes. Rowan moved steadily, snowshoes distributing his weight, each step deliberate. He kept his pace conservative, conserving energy. Kestrel ranged ahead and to the side, never far enough to lose sight. At 9 years old, the dog no longer sprinted unless necessary, but his endurance remained formidable. After an hour, the wind shifted, cutting across the slope hard enough to sting exposed skin. Snow began to blow sideways, erasing tracks within minutes. Rowan welcomed that. Being followed became harder when the forest refused to remember. They reached a shallow ravine where a frozen stream cut through the land. Rowan paused, scanning the tree line. Kestrel stopped abruptly, head lifting, ears forward. He let out a low, restrained sound, then moved down slope, nose working the air. Rowan followed, crouching low. At the edge of the ravine stood a man with a rifle slung across his chest. He was tall, thin, and wrapped in layered winter gear that bore no markings. His beard was dark and uneven, his face sharp-featured, eyes narrow from long exposure to wind and sun. He appeared to be in his late 30s. His posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of someone used to waiting. When he saw Rowan, he did not raise his weapon. "Morning," the man said. His voice was flat, controlled. "You're a long way from town." Rowan kept his hands visible. "So are you." The man's gaze flicked to Kestrel, assessing. "That's a serious dog." "So I've been told." The man nodded once. "Name's Marcus Hen." He hesitated, then added, "I hunt for Northwind, or I used to." Rowan waited. Marcus shifted his weight, snow crunching softly. "They pay well for discretion," he said. "But discretion turns into silence real quick. I don't like silence." His eyes hardened briefly. "They sent me to watch the East Ridge, make sure nothing moved during the storm." "And now?" Rowan asked. "And now I'm talking to you instead of reporting," Marcus said. "That should tell you something." Kestrel took a step forward, then stopped, reading the man's tension. Marcus did not flinch. "You leaving?" Marcus asked. "For now," Rowan said. Marcus nodded slowly. "Good, because they're done testing. Next step won't be polite." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded map, handing it over. "There's an old logging road south of here, buried but passable on foot. It'll put you near Highway 41 by nightfall if the storm eases." "Why help me?" Rowan asked. Marcus's mouth tightened. "Because Lena Vargo was right, and because I watched them bury her work." He glanced back toward the trees. "That kind of thing doesn't wash off." Rowan took the map. "You should leave." Marcus nodded, already stepping back. "I already am." He disappeared into the storm without another word. His tracks erased almost immediately. Rowan and Kestrel followed the route Marcus had marked, the forest thinning slightly as the land sloped downward. The storm intensified by midday, wind screaming through the trees, forcing them to stop and brace more than once. At one point, a dead pine came down not 20 yards away, cracking the air like a gunshot. Kestrel flinched, then steadied, eyes scanning for secondary danger. They reached the logging road by mid-afternoon. It was little more than a depression in the snow, barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest, but it led true. Rowan followed it south, muscles burning, lungs working harder as altitude and cold took their toll. By dusk, the wind eased just enough to allow movement without shouting over it. The forest gave way to a low ridge overlooking the highway. Headlights cut through the snow below, distant but real. Rowan stopped beneath the cover of trees and pulled out his phone. Battery was low but holding. He connected. the hard drive and began transferring files to an encrypted cloud drop Jonah had set up weeks earlier. The progress bar crept forward, painfully slow. Kestrel stood watch, body angled downhill, ears tracking the road and the forest behind them. When the transfer completed, Rowan exhaled slowly. He powered the phone down and removed the battery, slipping both into separate pockets. The files were out now, not public, not yet, but beyond immediate reach. They descended carefully and reached the shoulder of the highway just as night fully claimed the sky. Rowan flagged down the first truck he saw, a battered semi hauling timber north. The driver slowed and leaned out. The man was heavy-set, early 50s, with a thick red beard braided at the end and eyes permanently squinted from glare. He studied Rowan and Kestrel without surprise. "Rough day to be walking," he said. "Storm got ahead of us," Rowan replied. The driver grunted. "Hop in, dog too. I don't leave folks out. Here." Rowan climbed in, Kestrel curling up at his feet. The cab smelled of diesel and coffee. As the truck pulled back onto the road, Rowan allowed himself one long breath. Behind them, the forest closed again, keeping its secrets. Ahead, the road opened. Rowan knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The pressure would follow. But now, the story had moved beyond one cabin, one clearing, one buried truth, and it was no longer silent. The truck dropped Rowan, Hale, and Kestrel outside a truck stop just south of Ishpeming, where the storm loosened its grip enough to allow the world to move again. Snow still fell, but lightly now, as if exhausted by its own effort. The sky remained low and bruised, yet there was motion in it, brakes forming, light trying to return. Rowan watched the semi's taillights disappear down the highway before turning toward the building's glow. Inside, the truck stop smelled of diesel fuel, frying grease, and overheated coffee. It was warm in the blunt, industrial way of places meant to keep people functional rather than comfortable. A few drivers sat hunched over counters, faces drawn, hands wrapped around mugs. No one paid Rowan more attention than a passing glance. He looked like any other man shaken loose by winter. He chose a booth near the back, where the noise dulled into a steady hum. Kestrel lay beneath the table, his body pressed against Rowan's boots, eyes half-lidded but alert. Rowan ordered coffee and eggs he barely tasted. His focus was inward now, running calculations that had nothing to do with distance or weather. The files were out. That mattered. But files alone did not move the world. Stories did. Rowan pulled the burner phone from his pocket and reassembled it, slipping the battery back into place. The signal flickered once, then steadied. He dialed a number from memory, one he had not used in years. The call rang twice before being answered. "Hale," came the voice on the other end, male, calm, familiar. "You usually don't call unless something's broken." "Still are," Rowan replied. A pause, then a breath of recognition. "Rowan." The voice belonged to Daniel Crow, a former Army intelligence officer turned federal investigator. He was 49 now, tall and spare, with a narrow face that seemed permanently carved into seriousness. Years of interrogations had etched lines around his eyes, but his voice still carried restraint rather than suspicion. After the service, Crow had taken a position with the environmental crime section of the DOJ, chasing cases that required patience more than force. "You're off-grid," Crow said, "which means you want to stay that way." "For the moment," Rowan answered. "I need you to listen." Rowan laid it out plainly. No embellishment, dates, locations, names where he had them, absences where he didn't. He referenced the files Crow would already be seeing populate a secure intake channel. Jonah Pike's drop point had been designed for this. Crow did not interrupt. When Rowan finished, there was silence on the line, not disbelief, but processing. "This goes higher than county," Crow said finally. "Higher than state, if half of this holds." "It holds," Rowan replied. "I believe you," Crow said. "That's not the same as moving fast." Rowan understood. "They won't wait." "No," Crow agreed. "They won't." He paused. "Stay visible. Public places. Don't return to the property yet. I'll initiate a preliminary hold, but it won't stop unofficial pressure." Rowan glanced down at Kestrel, who had lifted his head at the change in tone. "They're already past unofficial." Crow exhaled slowly. "Then you did the right thing getting this out. I'll be in touch. Keep your phone off unless you need it." The line went dead. Rowan finished his coffee and paid in cash. He left without hurry, stepping back into the cold as evening approached. The storm had passed, leaving behind a brittle stillness that made every sound carry farther than it should. They didn't go far. Rowan booked a room at a roadside motel a few miles down the highway, the kind with doors that opened directly to the parking lot and a flickering vacancy sign that buzzed like an insect. The clerk barely looked up as Rowan signed the register. She was middle-aged, heavy-set, her hair dyed too dark. For her complexion, her eyes tired but observant. She slid the key across the counter and returned to her crossword without comment. The room was clean enough, functional. Rowan checked it carefully before settling in. He blocked the door with a chair, set the radio low, and lay back on the bed without removing his boots. Kestrel took position near the window, facing outward. Sleep came in fragments. Near dawn, Kestrel rose silently, his ears pricked, his body tensing. Rowan was awake instantly. Headlights swept briefly across the curtains, then vanished. An engine idled somewhere nearby, too quiet to be casual. Rowan did not move. He waited. After several minutes, the sound faded. They were still being followed, just not aggressively, not yet. By mid-morning, the first ripple broke. Rowan sat at the small table, watching local news on mute. Kestrel lay beside him, chewing on a dried strip of meat Jonah had packed. The ticker at the bottom of the screen shifted, then settled on a headline that made Rowan's jaw tighten. State agencies review water quality complaints in northern Michigan. The anchor spoke with practiced neutrality. Behind her, images of streams and sampling crews cycled. The story was brief, careful, non-committal. But it was public. Rowan's phone vibrated once. A text, no sender ID, you moved the story. They noticed. Rowan deleted the message without replying. An hour later, a second call came through the secure channel. This time it wasn't Crow. "Mr. Hale," a woman's voice said. "My name is Rebecca Sloan. I'm with the Detroit Free Press." Her tone was controlled but direct. "We received documents overnight tied to Northwind materials and potential contamination in the Upper Peninsula. Your name appears on the property records associated with one of the sites." Rowan closed his eyes briefly. The story was breathing now. "I can't comment," he said. "I'm not asking for comment," Sloan replied. "I'm asking for confirmation." She paused. "And I'm asking because someone tried to convince my editor not to run this." That got his attention. Sloan continued. "I've been doing environmental investigations for 20 years. I know when pressure shows up early. That usually means there's something worth hiding." Rowan considered her. Rebecca Sloan was likely mid-40s, seasoned, the kind of journalist who had learned when to push and when to wait. He pictured her as sharp-eyed, practical, not sentimental. A survivor of newsrooms that rewarded speed and punished hesitation. "You should be careful," Rowan said. "I am," Sloan replied. "That's why I'm calling you instead of knocking on your door." She lowered her voice. "If you're willing to meet, I'll come alone. Public place." Rowan glanced at Kestrel. The dog watched him steadily, tail still. "One condition," Rowan said. "You don't publish anything that points back to where the originals are." Sloan did not hesitate. "Agreed." They chose a diner in Marquette for the following afternoon. Visible, loud, difficult to control. Rowan ended the call and powered the phone down again. He sat back and waited. The counter pressure came faster than he expected. By early evening, Northwind issued a statement, calm, polished, denying wrongdoing, attributing concerns to misinterpreted data and activist exaggeration. The language was clean enough to sound plausible, but Rowan recognized the tempo. It was defensive, not dismissive. Kestrel growled softly as another vehicle slowed near the motel, then continued on. Rowan did not look. He had learned that attention was currency. Night fell again, but this time it carried less weight. The storm had passed, the road was open, and the truth, once buried, had begun to circulate. Rowan lay back on the bed, one hand resting on Kestrel's shoulder. He felt tired now, not from fear, but from momentum. Things were moving beyond his control. That was both relief and risk. Tomorrow, he would meet the press. Soon after, the federal machinery would turn fully, and somewhere north of here, beneath a brick hearth in a quiet clearing, a secret would no longer be alone. Morning in Marquette arrived quietly, as if the city itself were tired of escalation. The lake lay hidden behind low cloud, but its breath still moved through the streets, cold and patient. Rowan Hale watched it from the diner window, his coffee untouched, his reflection faintly layered over the glass. He looked older than he had a week ago, not in years but in weight. the kind of weight that comes when a man realizes events no longer belong to him alone. The diner was busy enough to discourage privacy. Construction workers in reflective jackets filled one counter. A pair of retirees shared toast in silence. The clatter of plates and the hiss of the grill formed a steady cover. Rowan had chosen the booth with his back to the wall. Kestrel lay beneath the table, stretched out but alert, his chin resting on his paws, amber eyes following motion without obvious interest. Rebecca Sloane arrived precisely on time. She was in her mid-40s, tall and straight-backed, with dark hair, cut just below her jaw and streaked lightly with gray she had chosen not to hide. Her coat was practical rather than stylish, and she carried herself with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to walking into rooms where people wished she wouldn't. Her eyes were sharp, assessing without being confrontational, and when she smiled, it was brief and professional. "Mr. Hale," she said, sliding into the booth opposite him. "And you must be Kestrel." Kestrel lifted his head once, acknowledged her presence, then settled again. Rebecca noticed. She always noticed. "You don't waste time," she said. "I don't have any," Rowan replied. She nodded and placed a recorder on the table without turning it on. "This stays off unless you say otherwise." Her voice was calm, but there was a tautness beneath it. "Federal sources confirmed this morning that warrants were issued overnight. Northwind facilities, county offices, private residences." Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. "That was fast." "Only because they moved first," Rebecca said. "Someone tried to bury this. That always speeds things up." She studied him. "They burned your cabin." Rowan did not look surprised. "Was anyone hurt?" "No," she said. "But the fire was deliberate. Accelerants. Witnesses saw vehicles leaving before responders arrived." Kestrel shifted, sensing the change in Rowan's breathing. "They didn't find what they were looking for," Rowan said. Rebecca's mouth curved faintly. "No, they didn't," she leaned forward. "They did find enough to justify a full environmental seizure, the state stepping in, so is the EPA. Rowan exhaled slowly. The truth had survived without him needing to guard it with his body. They talked for nearly an hour. Rowan answered what he could, avoided what he must. Rebecca asked precise questions, never pushing when he declined. She understood the difference between resistance and restraint. When they finished, she turned off the recorder she had never activated. "You know what happens next," she said. "This gets ugly before it gets clean." "I know," Rowan replied. She gathered her coat. "For what it's worth, Lena Vargo's name will be restored." She hesitated, then added, "She's alive. We confirmed it an hour ago. Protective custody. She'll testify." Rowan closed his eyes briefly. He hadn't known he'd been carrying that uncertainty until it lifted. Outside, sirens moved through the city. Not panicked, but purposeful. Rowan paid the check and stepped into the cold. The day felt different now. Not safer, but honest. 2 days later, Rowan returned north. The road to Hollow Brick Place was blocked by state vehicles and federal trucks. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind like warning flags. Men and women in marked jackets moved with clipped efficiency, taking samples, documenting damage. A temporary command post had been set up, near the tree line. Daniel Crow met him at the perimeter. Crow looked thinner than Rowan remembered, his hair more gray at the temples, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. But his handshake was steady. "You shouldn't be here," Crow said. "I know," Rowan replied. Crow sighed. "Everything under that hearth is intact. Fire never reached it." He paused. "They tried to erase a problem. Instead, they preserved evidence." Kestrel stood beside Rowan, calm despite the activity, his coat dusted with ash from the burned cabin. "Northwind's executives are in custody," Crow continued. "County officials, too. Sheriff Bell resigned this morning, before we arrested him." Rowan nodded once. "What happens to the land?" Crow looked toward the ruins. "For now, federal hold, cleanup orders, long process." He met Rowan's eyes. "After that, it's yours again, if you want it." Rowan looked at the blackened remains of the cabin. The chimney still stood, bricks, dark but solid, rising from the ash like a spine that refused to bend. "I'll rebuild," he said. Crow studied him, then nodded. "I figured you would." Weeks passed. Spring came slowly to the Upper Peninsula, hesitant and uneven. Snow retreated in patches, revealing dark earth beneath. Creeks swelled and ran clearer than they had in years. Cleanup crews worked under supervision, hauling contaminated soil away, sealing what had been damaged. The land began to breathe again. Rowan stayed nearby, renting a small place on the edge of town. He walked Kestrel each morning along the lake, letting the dog move at his own pace. The whiteness in Kestrel's muzzle grew more pronounced, but his stride remained sure. People began to recognize them. Some nodded, some thanked him. Rowan accepted neither praise nor blame. He had done what he could live with. One afternoon, Eli Mercer visited. He stood awkwardly, hat in hand, eyes on the ground. "Water's clean again," he said. "First time my grandkids can fish without warnings." Rowan nodded. "That's good." Eli cleared his throat. "If you need help rebuilding?" He shrugged. "I know wood." Rowan almost smiled. By early summer, a new cabin rose on the clearing's edge, smaller than the old one, stronger, built with windows that welcomed light and walls that did not pretend to hide secrets. The hearth was rebuilt too, brick by brick, solid and honest. On the day Rowan moved back in, Kestrel lay in the grass nearby, watching birds with the mild curiosity of age. Rowan sat on the porch steps, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. He had come north looking for quiet. What he found was responsibility, and in carrying it, he had discovered something quieter still, a sense of place, earned rather than taken. Kestrel rose and padded over, resting his head against Rowan's knee. Rowan set the mug aside and rested his hand on the dog's neck. "Good job," he murmured. The wind moved. Through the trees, not as a warning this time, but as a passing breath. The land listened, and for the first time in a long while, it did not need to speak. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes, they come quietly, through a loyal dog who refuses to leave, through a broken place that still holds truth, through a weary soul who chooses to stand instead of turning away. Rowan did not set out to be a hero. He only listened, and in listening, he became part of something larger than fear. Perhaps that is how God works most often, not by removing the storm, but by sending us the strength, the courage, or the companion we need to walk through it. In our daily lives, we may feel forgotten, unseen, or worn down by battles no one else understands. But this story reminds us that no pain is wasted, no act of faith is too small, and no life, human or animal, is ever truly alone in God's eyes. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you or where you are watching from. And if you believe in kindness, loyalty, and quiet miracles, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He watch over every child, every animal, and every soul facing fear in silence. And may you always find light, even in the coldest, quietest places.